Hi, this is Dan here. I hope you're doing really well today. In this lesson, I'm going to show you 6 ways that you can use modes on bass guitar. Now, first of all, what is a mode? Best way to explain it is to play C major, which is just C to C. And then if you take the second note and go from D to D, using exactly the same notes but start on D, you have a subset of the C major scale, and that's really what a mode is. You can start playing a mode on every single different degree of the C major scale to get 7 modes. And when you do that, you get this, and it's absolutely crucial to know that you get the mode from which comes a triad and an arpeggio or a chord. That's really, really important. Now, you can get 7 modes from C major. You can also get 7 from the harmonic minor, 7 from the melodic minor, but do not worry. You don't need to know all those modes. I'm going to show you now some common ways to use the modes. First of all, we've got a 2-5 progression. I'll explain that in a minute, but let me just play a bass line over this one. Right, so in that example, we have a 2-5 chord progression. The mode built off the 2 is a Dorian mode, so this is that D Dorian. And the mode built off the 5 is Mixolydian. These are 2 very common modes. I mentioned that we have 21 modes just now. These are 2 that you're going to hear all the time on bass. G Mixolydian is this. By the way, that PDF and all backing tracks can be downloaded for free. I'll put a link below. And I was trying to make it quite obvious as I was playing that the 2 chord, you can play a D Dorian over it. And it's quite melodic. This is what I do all the time. I play scales or modes and it creates melodic bass lines. And then you hit the G and you've got G Mixolydian. That's one way to practice it. Just play the Dorian mode up and then the Mixolydian. So that would be D Dorian to G Mixolydian. Sounds really good. That's a 2-5 progression. That's just one example of many different chord progressions that you can use modes over. The next example is in funk bass playing. Now there's a very high chance that that funk bass line that you love uses this mode. It's the Dorian mode. Listen to this. D Dorian once again, just D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D. You can play it anywhere on the bass. As long as you get those notes, you're playing D Dorian, which comes from the parent scale of C major. After a while, you never think about any of that stuff I just said. You just remember it and you learn it by pattern and by sound. Now, this bass line here is one from my funk bass course, and we're using that as an example for this. So we've got D there. Now B, C, D. The intervals of those notes, which is the distance of them from the root, from the tonic of D, that's a major 6th interval. And then you have a flat 7 next to it, or a minor 7th. And then there's the octave. That against the D, especially with your flat 3rd, the F, that just creates a Dorian flavor. And really, modes are about flavors, and those flavors create different emotions and vibes. And this Dorian mode is pure funk. Another good example of that. Good Times by Chic. It literally is the Dorian mode ascending. So here we've got exactly those Dorian notes there to a D. Little ghost note before we go B, C. And again, that B is the major 6th. That B with the C, which is the flat 7, is the root. If you emphasize these notes that make it whatever mode it is, it just sounds like that flavor. And that's the flat third, that's the F. That is an absolute brilliant mode. It's used all the time. If you're ever doing a funk jam and someone just starts playing a drum beat and the keyboard player plays, like, for example, D minor 7, you're in a Dorian vamp groove, and that's something that bass players do all the time. So far we've mentioned the Dorian and the Mixolydian, and I'm going to mention the Mixolydian again because these are two very common modes. You can use the Mixolydian in major blues bass lines. This is a B-flat Mixolydian. Literally just playing it up and down sounds quite bluesy. Let's have a go with the backing track. So in that B-flat blues, we have dominant 7th chords. We've got B-flat 7, E-flat 7, and F7. And a Mixolydian mode, that one, gives you, if you do the 1st, the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th, that gives you a dominant 7th arpeggio. So they fit together. That's a very important concept, is to understand that any scale or mode has a chord that it can be built into, you know? So you need to marry those two together. You can just learn that shape, play it over B-flat 7, go to the E-flat 7, do the same thing, back to E-flat 7, F7, same mode. Now that's not a bass line, but that's a selection of notes that you can call upon when you're playing major blues bass lines, or something like this. You'd be doing stuff like that. That's a major pentatonic scale. This next example is something that I use a lot. So when I record bass lines, which I do a lot of in this studio, I get a whole range of different songs, different chord progressions. Now, not every chord progression that you get sticks to one key, so sticks to one diatonic key. There's a very good example of what I'm about to show you, which is Pink Floyd's Coming Back to Life. Let me just play you a little bit of it. For copyright reasons, I'm not going to play any of the original, but I'll put a link below so you can hear it. Guy Pratt on bass is absolutely fantastic. Now, that chord progression, C major to F major, A minor to G to F. Very standard diatonic chords. C is the 1, F is the 4, A minor is the 6, and G is the 5. Okay, but there's a section in it that goes like this. So that's the 6 to the 4, A minor to F. Then it goes B flat. B flat is a chord not from that chord progression. It's a borrowed chord, if you like, and it comes from a different key. And this is not a hard and fast rule, but it's a very common rule, that if you're playing something that's in one key, for example C, and all of a sudden a major chord comes at you, you can usually play a Lydian over it. Now listen to this part of the song, because Guy Pratt does this. So it goes A minor to F, A minor to B flat, That's the little melodic interest that Guy Pratt puts in. Now, B flat, Lydian. What characterizes this mode as Lydian is very nearly major. But that fourth note goes up a semitone or a half step. That's called a sharp 4, okay? And that's what makes it Lydian. And that's what Guy Pratt's playing. It would not be right to go... It's just completely wrong. So that's one way of using modes, is that you have a borrowed chord that's outside of the key and you can use a mode over that. Right, number 5 is over a good old major 2-5-1. Right, so very similar. We've seen this before, the 2 to the 5, D minor 7 to G7. When I played that example at the beginning, it was a bit sort of slow, psychedelic rock type thing. And now we've got a walking 2-5-1 jazz chord progression. So that's characterized by playing notes on every beat. That's the walking part of it. D Dorian over the 2 chord. G Mixolydian over the 5 chord. C major or C Ionian, they're the same thing, over the 1 chord. Don't forget that you've got your arpeggios that come from that. D minor 7, G7, C major 7. So when you're playing walking bass lines, you can use a combination of those arpeggios and the modes. There are other things as well, like chromatic notes to get from one chord to the other, and suddenly you've got lots of good note choices for your walking bass lines. The final thing that you can do with modes that's a fantastic use of it is to write music, create music or write bass lines. Now, points 1 to 5 here, I had some examples. In this one, I don't really know what I'm going to do, and that's the point. I'm going to write a bass line or 2 completely live. I will make one Dorian. Okay, so let's go Dorian funk, and I'll probably change key. Let's go to E Dorian. It's the same shape as the same intervals as the D one I played, just starting on E. Okay, so okay, funk. That fast, digga digga dig, 16th notes. There's that E, D, C sharp. That's the root, the flat 7, and there's that major 6. That characterizes it as Dorian, especially against that flat 3rd. So if you use some ghost note, hammer-ons, you know, you can just really come up with funk bass lines very easily. Let's stay in E, and I'm going to do a different mode. Now let's do actually a different mode from a different scale. So far we've dealt with major scale modes, and the ones that I've mentioned are very, very common. This one is not so common, but it sounds good. It's the E Phrygian dominant. Don't worry too much about these crazy names, but it's the 5th mode of the harmonic minor scale. It's the harmonic minor scale. If you play that exact same set of notes starting on the 5th note degree of the scale, okay, you get this E to F thing, which is a minor 2nd, and it just sounds quite rock. You can hear I'm going into rock metal territory here. Don't forget the arpeggio that comes from this. You know, you can come up with something to do with rock there, use a different technique, perhaps a different time signature, and suddenly you're composing music, thinking modally. Whilst I'm thinking about it, actually, the fourth mode of the harmonic minor scale is quite a dark sounding, interesting one as well. It's exactly the same as the Dorian mode, with the exception of the fourth, which is a sharp fourth. And you get an exotic sound. One good reason to play it on an E is then you can get an E drone and play the mode and you'll hear the sound like this. Okay, so you can play around with that. Now, it sounds a little bit like something Justin Chancellor of Tool might make, but equally it's not going to be in a pop song. So you can't shoehorn a mode into a certain style of music. They have their own mood, their own emotion, which you as a writer can manipulate if you would like to create something that sounds a little bit, you know, like that. Like, you know, Lydian is used a lot in film music. It's used a lot when there are scenes in space or when there needs to be an emotion evoking wonder. You know, Lydian is used a lot. Why is that? Because it sounds like that. So you can use that to your advantage. Plus you can learn these modes and you'll start to hear them in bass lines. I literally have hundreds more examples that I can give you, but I think I'm going to leave that lesson there. Thanks very much for watching. If you do want to check out my funk bass course or other courses and books, I'll put that link below. Otherwise, have a great day and I'll see you on the next video.